Joe Biden had some, we were talking about this before the show, some fairly progressive, relatively speaking,
relative for him,
and in many respects, relative to where the Democratic Party, the elected leadership has been over the past, 15, 20 years in his platform that he never spoke about. I mean, it's quite clear that he wanted to make this election a referendum on Donald Trump. And unfortunately, the majority of Americans in this country decided that they wanted to dump Donald Trump. Sadly, that I think hurt down ballot races because they weren't running on anything that people could not vote for a Democrat down ballot and achieve what the main thrust of the Democrats was, which was to get rid of Donald Trump. And the Democratic Party did a very bad job. We've talked about this. We'll continue to talk about it, of holding Republicans to account. We have another example of this from Dick Durbin, the Democratic whip in the Senate. And we will talk about that in a bit. But let's start with Joe Biden. And one of the things, regardless of what happens in Georgia, where we have this runoff on January 5th, if both Democrats win, the Democrats will have a majority if you count the vice president being able to vote in the Senate, within the Senate. That is less relevant when it comes to things like normal legislation because of the filibuster. And it is clear at this point that Joe Manchin says he will not vote for the filibuster. Who knows? Well,
he's saying that on all over cable news, his favorite medium to get attention.
Well, exactly. I mean, the irony is, of course, if there was no filibuster and he was the 50th vote for the Democrats, he would get that much more attention. But I imagine there would be a huge race to be that 50th vote. Nevertheless, one thing you can do with 50 votes plus one in the vice president is to pass things through reconciliation. You do not, that if it is, reconciliation is a specific parliamentary move or a type of bill, if you will, that requires only a simple majority. There are restrictions on what constitutes a reconciliation bill. It has to deal exclusively with things that involve the government spending money. And so that comes into play if the Democrats take 2 seats in Georgia. Otherwise, we can imagine a tremendous amount of obstruction by the Republicans, although there are Americans who are desperate right now for stimulus. We have people on unemployment, extended unemployment. $600 benefits have dried up, but the actual extension of unemployment in terms of time, that's going to run out within a month or so. We have the stimulus checks, the $1,200 7 months ago, I think have been expended.
Well, if you were a smart American, you would have held on to it.
I would have held on to it, or I would have invested it.
Right, invested in gold or whatever. Or that's what regular people do.
Put it in the market. I mean, that $1,200. There will be a desperate need for stimulus. One of the mechanisms for that stimulus can come through executive action. If you read enough of those personal finance books, they'll tell you, if you're not paying 16% on your credit card, you're saving 16%, obviously, and you're earning 16%. You want to earn 5% or 10% on your money? Don't have any debt that you would be paying that money on. Well, so the point being that if you have the ability to relieve Americans of some debt, that will have a stimulating effect on the economy. It will put more money in people's pockets. They will be able to spend that money.
Right, but that gets in the way of directly sending money to corporations and socializing Wall Street. I mean, that's kind of what the game is. And now we're going to hear from Republicans lots of concern about the deficit and the debt.
Without a doubt.
Now that it's time to, after having an immensely dark winter where thousands and thousands and thousands of Americans are going to die and the economy is going to get in an even darker place, then fiscal responsibility and austerity will be the talking point.
Of course, that it's like perennial after the Republicans lose an election.
Which makes that reconciliation point that you brought up even more important with taking back those 2 seats.
In the event that those seats don't come back in, executive actions are going to be crucial to provide at least some relief to people. Here's Joe Biden in Wilmington yesterday talking about, he is asked whether student loan forgiveness, because a huge amount of the student loan debt is held by the U.S. government. And that can be relieved by the executive branch, and that would be the president. Here is the question on Monday.
On the economy, the vice president-elect talked about having an economy that works for working people. One thing I didn't hear you talk specifically about is canceling student loan debt. Does student loan forgiveness figure in your plan? Would you take executive action to achieve it?
It does figure in my plan. I've laid out in detail. For example, the legislation passed by the Democratic House calls for immediate $10,000 forgiveness of student loans. It's holding people up. They're in real trouble. They're having to make choices between paying their student loan and paying their rent, those kinds of decisions. It should be done immediately. In addition to that, as you know, I think that everything from community college straight through to doubling Pell Grants to making sure that we have access, free education for anyone making under $125,000 for 4 years of college. And there is a program that exists now under the law that forgives student loans for being able to engaging in public service. I'm going to institute a fundamental change in that so it's able to be available to everyone that in fact is engaged. It's not being very well managed right now. So I'm going to do all of those things. Thank you.
Now, there's a lot to sort of unpack there. Mm-hmm. Congress, I would say the House, has passed a bill providing immediate relief, $10,000. Now, of course, the Senate's not going to pass that. He seems to be okay with that $10,000. The question is, and now, because we do know that Schumer and Warren introduced a bill to forgive $50,000.
Right. Schumer, too, worried about a primary challenge joining with Elizabeth Warren. I mean, if Warren had introduced it on their own, please, the Biden administration, shoo-shoo, we're not paying attention. But with the Senate Minority Leader signing on to it, I mean, then we could have some more ambitious legislation here, potentially, if Pelosi gets her caucus together. 30,000.
Well, we don't necessarily need Congress in this instance. Let's just assume if we're in a situation where there is the Democrats do not have the majority in the Senate. They don't have the ability to pass anything unilaterally. Mitch McConnell is not going to be terribly helpful. They will pass something. Undoubtedly, it will say that corporations cannot be held liable for the way that they treat their workers or, frankly, the citizenry in general, their customers, for health and safety and no liability. And then maybe there'll be some money for corporations or something, or small businesses. Maybe there'll be a stimulus check. We don't know. But the point is, undoubtedly, if the Republicans have the ability to stop that legislation, they will do it. They will limit how much it helps people. Joe Biden, this is a unique opportunity for Joe Biden to both have the built-in justification for taking executive action on this point, the built-in justification for making it substantial in terms of how much debt is forgiven. The president of the American Association of Home Builders, I think this was 2 or 3 years ago, was saying at that time, and that was when student debt was about $1 trillion. It's now almost $1.5 trillion. Was saying the number one inhibitor of new home building was student debt.
Well, I mean, for my generation, it's a fantasy to own a home for most people. I mean, it's just it's not something that's even considered because so many are crippled by student loan debt. I believe the average is $30,000 for young people and for everybody, I guess. So I think the difference in the House's less ambitious proposals that they wanted to tie it to the second stimulus, right? The $10,000 and Schumer and Warren are signaling to Biden, because they're in the minority right now, this is what you can do via executive action. You can be more ambitious. You can circumvent it, which I mean, I think is good. I think it's really good. And it seems like he's listening, even though it seems like based on those comments, he's more inclined to only do $10,000.
Well, I mean, that's the thing. It's going to be interesting to see. He didn't cite Warren and Schumer, but as soon as he mentioned that, everybody else did.
Right.
And so if that lands somewhere around $30,000 and it is a mechanism in which to put more money in the economy, everybody wins. It is stimulus.
There was just quickly, there was this NPR piece that talked about canceling student debt and what it would do. It could increase jobs by $4.4 million over the first 5 years. This is all student debt. Home ownership by $300,000 a year, GDP up by over $100 billion a year, and it would decrease the racial wealth gap. I mean, it just seems like a no-brainer for the overall health of the economy if you want to just be a standard neoliberal politician in this area.
Right. And look, I mean, and I think, look, that's the best that we can have. I mean, that is the reason why this is so much easier because of the context, where this isn't a question of simply providing some equity or economic justice in the context of our society. It is much easier to do simply because it is going to be desperately needed, and you need to figure out any way possible that the executive can stimulate the economy. And this is the most obvious one that sits there. I would also say that there is a mechanism, it seems to me, to provide for that free college. If he wants to cap it at $125,000 and makes it easier, okay, fine. But one free college option, at least, in every state, and that is to provide loans and just have rolling debt forgiveness on those loans.
Yeah. You have to supplement the debt forgiveness with future college options so that debt isn't accrued. You can't just do it one time. Exactly.
And by hook or crook, I mean, if this comes in because of the situation we're in, not because Joe Biden is a dyed-in-the-wool progressive, I'll take it.
Well, it's you have to take a page out of the disaster capitalist book, as Naomi Klein put it in her book, which is that oftentimes actors who want to capitalize on situations, they use the vacuum created by disasters and national and international crises to put in place systems that benefit them financially. And I mean, the war in Iraq is a great example for the military industrial complex and things like that. But progressives and people looking at this pandemic, we could use this opportunity to implement policies like healthcare and student debt forgiveness. This is a time of crisis, so it allows for bigger thinking.
And if I'm not mistaken, I think, even Rahm Emanuel said at the time, in the wake of the financial crisis, you never want a serious crisis to go to waste, and that it's an opportunity. Now, I didn't appreciate the opportunity he took.
Yeah, he
frankly,
kind of wasted it.
But the point being is, you need to see this as an opportunity to create, once there is one-time student debt, once that idea happens and people can see that it's not, because I think that's the problem also that Republicans are going to have, try and revive this whole austerity and deficit hysteria, is that they already gave up the ghost. For 4 years, they didn't care at all. Now, I happen to think that we don't really have a problem with the deficit and debt because of the fact that we have such control over our own currency. But based upon their own logic, Republicans completely gave up that idea. And good. I hope we never see it again.